To Henry Ormerod, the future Lord Halston.
Greed leads to suspicion.
That is it, Billy. We are out of it.
Suspicion to blackmail.
What if he knew the truth about his beautiful wife?
Blackmail to abduction.
As soon as I've dropped off the money, we'll have Harry home in no time.
The Beggar Bride concludes tomorrow at 9 on BBC One.
Bank Holiday Movie Magic.
Everything I do it for you.
Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Tomorrow, 6:05 on BBC One.
Singing their praises, talking frankly. The Osmonds, family talent, family values on BBC One in 15 minutes. The news now on BBC One with Nicholas Witchell.
The Lady in the Lake murder case. A man has been arrested. He's being questioned about the discovery in Coniston Water of the body of Carol Park. Local authorities have been told to speed up the disposal of cattle killed in the BSE cull. And Mass for more than 1 million. Catholics in France have heard the Pope condemn religious intolerance. Good evening. Police in Barrow-in-Furness in Cumbria are tonight still questioning a man about the murder of Carol Park, the woman who disappeared in 1976 and whose body was found at the bottom of Coniston Water 11 days ago. The man was arrested by detectives at a house in Barrow this morning. Our North of England correspondent Mike Mackay reports.
Today's arrest followed a police search at the Barrow-in-Furness home of Gordon Park, Carol's husband, who has since remarried. It's understood he and his third wife returned from a cycling holiday in France in the early hours of today. The man arrested by Cumbria police has been held at Barrow Police Station, where he's being questioned about the disappearance of Carol Park 21 years ago.
At 8:10 this morning, a Barrow man was arrested in connection with the murder of Caroline Park. He is currently being held here at Barrow Police Station and is helping police with their inquiries. The weighted body of Mrs. Park, covered in plastic sheets, was recovered from Coniston Water 11 days ago. It was in July 1976 that Mrs. Park, a 30-year-old teacher, vanished after her husband had gone to Blackpool for the day with their 3 children. Mrs. Park remained at home, saying she felt unwell. There'd been no trace of her until divers found her body in Coniston Water. At their home, members of her family were staying out of sight today, and neighbours were unwilling to talk about the latest development.
See no police activity during the day at all?
No, none at all.
There's no suggestion that the man being interviewed by the police didn't give his fullest cooperation. With a police superintendent's authority, they can hold him for up to 36 hours. After that, to extend the arrest periods for possibly another 36 hours, they'd have to seek a magistrate's order. Mike Mackay, BBC News, Barrow-in-Furness.
Local authorities have been told by the government to speed up the disposal of a huge backlog of cattle carcasses caused by the BSE crisis. Every week up to 15,000 healthy animals are slaughtered as a precaution. They can't be used for food and have to be incinerated.
All over Britain there's been opposition to propose new incinerators for burning cattle remains. Here in Cornwall, the strength of protests has already stopped 2 applications for planning permission. But the stockpile of rendered meat and bone meal and also tallow waiting for destruction is increasing at the rate of 2,000 tonnes a week. Without more incinerators, there could be 1 million tonnes stuck in warehouses in 5 years' time. And the waste disposal industry has been urging the government to speed up the approval of new facilities.
It's been very tough to obtain planning permissions for cattle incinerators. The public are highly sceptical about the track record of incineration and about the companies that promote this. We have been able to get across the message that the technology that's used now is very safe, and the government's own independent scientific advisors have wholeheartedly endorsed that view.
20 new incinerators are needed, and the government has written to local authorities with advice on how to loosen the red tape, reminding them the rules already permit new incinerators. Planning permission isn't necessarily needed on industrial sites or at existing abattoirs. Campaigners like those in Cornwall are horrified.
The idea of trying to get planning by the back door, if you've got an abattoir you can possibly have a cremator, is is horrendous to the nth degree. A lot of these abattoirs are older abattoirs, and they're sited, I mean the one in our area is sited right beside a large social housing estate.
The difficulty in destroying cattle remains might delay further the lifting of the European export ban on British beef, but any hint of fast-track approval for incinerators could anger local people and backfire on the government. Nicholas Jones, BBC News.
The International Development Secretary, Claire Short, has turned down an invitation to visit the Caribbean island of Montserrat to see the devastation caused by the volcano there. She said it wouldn't be helpful. Instead, she urged people on the island to calm down and stop criticising the amount of compensation the British government is offering residents who've been made homeless. From Montserrat, our correspondent Ben Brown has sent this report.
For the profoundly religious islanders of Montserrat, there's little left to do but pray. This service is in a school. The church where they used to worship has been destroyed by the volcano. The island's new Chief Minister, David Brandt, is calling on Britain to spend more money on this colony that is now struggling to survive. Britain's International Development Secretary, Claire Short, has said Montserratians will be asking for golden elephants next, but Mr. Brandt says her attitude is totally unacceptable.
We have fought for Britain. All people have died for Britain in the wars, and all we are asking is for them to come to our help. In the Falklands, they did not count the cost, and we're not asking for the unreasonable. All we ask is just a chance to start again.
The British government says it's already pouring £41 million of taxpayers' money into the island, but Montserratians claim much of that money has been frozen because this is a place perceived to be dying. Many here have now decided to stay, sometimes risking their lives to work the land right under the volcano.
As long as they allow us to stay here, I'm going to stay here. I'm not going to move to go nowhere. I go to your country, I go to London, I go all over. I don't like none. If I have to choose between jail and your country, I take in jail.
When the Montserrat volcano blows, as it is doing now, it is a terrifying sight. And yet, for all the people it's killed, all the destruction it's caused, many islanders are still prepared to stay, living in its shadow.
Because to leave, they say, would mean the end of the homeland they love. Ben Brown, BBC News, Montserrat.
Prayers have been said for the murdered 12-year-old Thomas Marshall at a church service in the Norfolk village of Haysborough where he lived. His body was found on Friday in woodland 50 miles from his home. He'd been strangled. Police have been continuing to search the area for clues and, as Clarence Mitchell reports from Norfolk, they've appealed for information about Thomas's last journey.
The search for evidence began early. For these Norfolk police officers, this was the start of a painstaking examination of the lay-by picnic area off the A11 near Thetford, where Thomas Marshall's body was found. The 12-year-old had left his home in Haysborough on the Norfolk coast on his mountain bike, intending to visit a friend around 6 p.m. on Thursday. The motorist found his body here at 5 on Friday, a gap of 23 hours, a distance of 50 miles. Detectives still need the public's help.
He was a distinctive lad. He had blonde hair. He was with a pedal cycle, which was in a fairly unusual colour, a pinkish red. He was dressed largely in black and wearing training shoes. Now, we've had an excellent response from the public around Thomas's area. He's a well-known lad. What we need is for that response to keep coming in.
In Haysborough, many villagers attended a special service in Thomas's memory. Prayers were said for him, his family and his friends.
As a community, it's quite very close. People know each other. They trust each other. We shall take each day as it comes.
As detectives mingled with churchgoers, it emerged that teachers at Thomas's school had become worried about children being approached by strangers in recent months. The police investigated at least one case. Thomas's school was put under observation for a time. Other schools were notified. To find Thomas's killer, the police believe the vehicle he was abducted in could be the key. Detectives are stressing that they're keeping an entirely open mind about the motive for Thomas's murder. They say it's vital that people come forward with information to help them piece together the little boy's last movements, from the moment he left home on his mountain bike on Thursday evening to the discovery of his body here nearly a day later. Clarence Mitchell, BBC News, near Thetford in Norfolk.
A man has been shot and wounded at the Notting Hill Carnival in West London. It happened near Portobello Green on the day the children's parade attracted around 500,000 spectators. The victim is in a stable condition in hospital. Germany's Michael Schumacher has won the Belgian Grand Prix. He now has a 12-point lead over Jacques Villeneuve, who finished 6th. Italy's Giancarlo Fisichella in a Jordan was 2nd, with Mika Hakkinen of Finland 3rd.
Spa's renowned for its water, but not from the source that caused such havoc at the start of the Belgian Grand Prix. With the drivers caught out by a sudden downpour, the safety car led the way for the first 3 laps. When it departed, it quickly became clear that it was a man in 3rd place, Michael Schumacher, who had the right tyres for the conditions. After squeezing past the Lacey, the German overtook Villeneuve, his only genuine challenger for the title, with ease. Within 8 laps, Schumacher had established a lead of more than a minute. The contest now was for 2nd place, filled in the last race by Damon Hill. The world champion, though, was struggling to cope with the conditions and retired shortly before the finish. Meanwhile, Villeneuve, as far back as 14th at one stage, knew that he desperately needed to score points. The solitary one that he eventually gained at the expense of Jean Alesi enabled Michael Schumacher to extend his World Championship lead to 12 points. It had been one of the most comfortable victories of the Ferrari driver's career. James Pearce, BBC News.
Football, and in the FA Carling Premiership, Chelsea have beaten Barnsley 6-0 at Oakwell. Barnsley's 2nd home defeat since being promoted was entirely brought about by Chelsea's foreign contingent. The first goal of the match came after Barnsley's defence failed to clear Dennis Wise's ball into the area, allowing Romanian Dan Petrescu to score off the post. An amazing throw by keeper Ed de Hoy, and Petrescu's long through ball began Gianluca Vialli's 4-goal run. His first was scored just before half-time, the Italians' first in the Premiership since March the 12th. Wise's corner set up Vialli's 4th and final goal, which was struck home from close range, taking Chelsea to a 6-0 win over the Premiership newcomers. On the final day of his visit to Paris, the Pope has celebrated Mass with more than 1 million worshippers at an open-air service. And he condemned religious intolerance, saying that belonging to different religious traditions should not be a source of tension. From Paris, Kevin Connolly.
In the sweltering midday heat, a triumphant end to a 4-day visit the Vatican regards as a huge success. The organisers of this Mass turned the Longchamp racecourse just outside Paris into what they called an open-air cathedral to mark World Youth Day. They expected a congregation of 700,000. In the end, they said, perhaps 1 million people turned up. Many had slept outdoors through the night to keep their places. Those who came late had to follow the service on specially erected television screens.
C'est ta face, Seigneur.
The Pope has not shied away from controversy on his 7th visit to France, speaking out forcefully against abortion and condemning religious intolerance on the anniversary of a massacre of Protestants by French Catholics 425 years ago. The state of his health has, as always, been the subject of the closest scrutiny. The symptoms of Parkinson's disease have sometimes been in evidence, and he has occasionally appeared tired. But when one interviewer asked him at the start of the visit if he felt young, the Pope replied simply, "See for yourself." And the Vatican believes the whole tone of his stay in France and the success of the youth festival have done much to further his goal of preparing the Catholic Church for the challenges of the next millennium. The Pope's last visit to France last year was overshadowed by speculation about what then seemed the very frail state of his health. He's reflected the much more upbeat tone of this trip himself by promising young Catholics he'll meet them again at the next World Youth Festival in Rome in the year 2000. Kevin Connolly, BBC News, Paris.
And finally, the main news once again. A man has been arrested in Cumbria in connection with the murder of Carol Park, the woman whose body was discovered in Coniston Water 21 years after she disappeared. That's it from the BBC Newsroom tonight. From all of us, good night.
Good evening to you. Once again, August bank holiday is living up to its rather dubious reputation. And we've got some more heavy rain moving up from the south at the moment, fast approaching the south coast, coming out of northwestern France there'll be the odd rumble of thunder mixed in with that bank of rain as it spreads across central and eastern parts of England tonight. Got some thunderstorms too running up across Southern Ireland and a few more showers across the far north and west, but they'll tend to fade away during the night. Now this weather system bringing all the heavy rain tonight will gradually move away into the North Sea around about early afternoon on Bank Holiday Monday. But it's in the central and eastern parts of England where we'll see some really wet night with some thunderstorms. Further north, as the showers fade away and skies begin to clear, there'll be some mist and fog patches too, and a pretty chilly night in the north, down to 2 or 3 degrees. A very humid 17 though in all this wet weather then across central and southeastern parts. Well, a weather alert for tomorrow morning as the conditions look very reminiscent of Spa. It looks like for southeast England and East Anglia it'll be more like Spa actually, with some really torrential rainfall, about some storms too, and very poor driving conditions for the first part of the day. Those thunderstorms are gradually moving away into the North Sea and skies brightening again from the northwest. I think the showers over Northern Ireland and the north and west of Scotland, though, will be pretty heavy and widespread later on. And temperatures much of a muchness tomorrow, around about 21, and that's 70 Fahrenheit. Good night.
Hello.
Hello, is that Mrs. Freeman?
Speaking.
Hello, Mrs. Freeman. Are you sitting down?
No.
Right, well, this is Professor Winston, Robert Winston. Well, let me just tell you straight away, you're pregnant. Right?
Oh.
So, you can sit down now and I'll talk you through it.
I haven't got nowhere to sit. I'm in the kitchen.
Well, that's good news, isn't it?
I can't believe it.
Tanya and Ray's story, Thursday at 10:20 on BBC One.
It's Burt Lancaster under that hat, and he's on BBC Two in a moment. A tough western, Ulzana's Raid.
Think of your favourite album of the year.
This is what you'll get.
Does it set your soul on fire? Or completely wind you up? Or simply get you in the mood?
If you wanna be my lover.
Experience that full-on mix with this year's Best Album Award with live coverage of the 1997 Mercury Music Prize on Thursday at midnight and highlights of the bands in performance Saturday 7:10 BBC Two.
Making a song and dance of it here on BBC One, Young Blood, High Spirits in Fame, our film at 11:30. And it just goes to show, if there's talent about, it probably runs.
He called his discount products and lost a jewellery empire. Now Gerald Ratner's building a health club.
It's taken me 5 years.
With a statement that there were indications the IRA were responsible for 2 recent murders and that Sinn Féin had dishonoured the principles of non-violence. It must be tough for the Irish government to swallow, but the two countries are determined to stick together like glue.
Then the two governments will work together on this. I didn't, and can I just state, I noted during the day that people were saying that all of these considerations were from the RUC. I haven't been speaking to anyone from the RUC now or in the past. Any considerations that I've taken into account are on the word of the British Prime Minister, and I consider a person whose word I'd listen to.
There is no question of a difference between us and the Irish. We've been working hard on it all day. There's going to be the plenary, as the Taoiseach said, tomorrow, and it'll be after a discussion with the parties for us to make a decision jointly. Thank you, gentlemen.
14 families have mourned deaths at the hands of the paramilitaries since the negotiations and the official ceasefires began. The UDP were expelled from talks after terrorists close to them confessed to 3 murders. But Sinn Féin claim, while police are quick to pin the latest 2 killings on the IRA, at least 6 Catholics have been murdered and no one has been blamed, no party expelled. This fuels their constant refrain that Catholics are treated as second-class citizens and they are being victimised by a biased police force. Sinn Féin say the unionists threatened to leave the talks unless they were expelled.
Basically got a lynch mob of Ulster Unionists been led by a British government which should know better in an attempt to bring about the downfall of this process. That's what we're seeing.
In central Dublin today, one of those little provocations that parties of the North so take to heart. Work continued to demolish the birthplace of Edward Carson, the man who led Northern Ireland's fight against Home Rule. The Unionist leaders paid a visit to deplore the desecration.
We think it's symbolic that they pay no attention to the need to preserve anything connected with unionism.
What about the talks themselves? Sinn Féin say this is a kangaroo court, you're leading a lynch mob.
No, this is a system which is in operation. The rules are there, and they have to abide by the rules. All the participants have to abide by the rules, and the two governments have to abide by the rules. And what has happened is only follow-up to what happened a month ago with the UDP. No difference whatsoever, no witch hunt. But if you and your friends go out to kill people, you must expect that you've got a problem to be at the table of democracy.
If Sinn Féin are expelled, the only party left with links to the paramilitaries will be the loyalist PUP. They ask perhaps the most difficult but the most central question. What on earth is going on the ground?
Now the question is, who's threatening who? Who are the people who demanded an all-inclusive process? Who are those people? Are they Sinn Féin? Are those the same people who look like they're running away from the parameters of democracy? Is that what they're doing? I say, we make assumptions because we don't know, and we'll be asking them. Whether it be in public in the room or privately in the margins, what the hell are you doing?
What has perhaps taken everybody here by surprise is Sinn Féin's vehemence. It seems the government's expected them to take a notional punishment of 3 weeks or so suspension with only ritual protests. But the Women's Coalition, the only party to oppose the expulsion, says once out, the hardliners may make it difficult for them to rejoin the talks.
This process is not served well by excluding people and serving indictment after indictment. As we come closer to the agreement, sad it is to say that there are going to be some pretty violent people out there determined to bring down this process, and they're the only people that gain by parties being excluded from negotiations.
These moves in Dublin are most difficult for the nationalist SDLP, who've made little comment, and none since the meeting began this morning. But the big question for everybody is if Sinn Féin are put out tomorrow or the next day, will that be another hiccup in these difficult talks or the effective end of the peace process?
We'll be talking to the Ulster Unionist David Trimble in just a moment. Before that, though, we go over to Dublin and to talk to Mitchell McLaughlin of Sinn Féin. Mitchell McLaughlin, are you so angry because the IRA did carry out these killings and you can't control them, or that you believe they didn't carry them out?
Well, we're angry because Sinn Féin's mandate and integrity in our approach to these negotiations is being called into question by the British government. They have not established and have not even attempted to establish that Sinn Féin have dishonoured the principles, yet they bring this indictment, and they expect all of the other participants to pass judgment on us without providing any evidence whatsoever.
So just to be absolutely clear about this, you do not speak at the talks for the IRA?
Absolutely.
Fine. So the IRA are not represented at the talks?
Absolutely.
Now, can you tell us what legal challenge you're thinking about when you're thinking about bringing some sort of action against the British government?
Well, you'll appreciate that we would be very anxious to keep those cards close to our chest, but I can say that we would be examining whether the procedures are being applied in a fair and just manner, and whether not just Sinn Féin, but those almost 200,000 people on this island who look to Sinn Féin to represent them in the talks have been treated in a just and a democratic fashion.
It's terribly,
I think,
yeah, I understand that, but it's terribly hard to see what kind of legal challenge you could mount, since we're talking not about a legal process, but a political process.
Well, in fact, we will examine whether there was any serious attempt at establishing whether Sinn Féin has honoured or dishonoured the commitments that it has been given. This process that we're all so concerned about could be brought into calamitous jeopardy by this precipitate action by the British government. And bear in mind that the basis of this is the man that you're about to speak to after me. David Trimble has refused to enter into one word of negotiation with my party, and he is claiming that it is unnecessary for him, even up to the deadline of May. And here we have a situation where there are people out there, and we know there are people out there, who are violently opposed to the peace process, and none of us has any control over that. No one is arguing that my party is guilty of involvement in that violence. What they're saying is it has happened and somebody has to be made to pay for it, and they're jeopardising the entire exercise.
Right, stay with us, Mr McLaughlin. We'll be coming back to you a little later, but David Trimble also joins us now from Dublin. If Sinn Féin are expelled tomorrow, Mr Trimble, for how long should they be kept out?
The question here is whether people are committed to democracy, whether they're committed to exclusively peaceful means. And that is judged by whether they've made a commitment to the Mitchell Principles. Murdering people is a breach of the Mitchell Principles. Yes. And the difficulties that Sinn Féin are in are entirely because the IRA have committed murders, and they are inextricably linked to the IRA. And that is the reality of the matter.
Right. So can I repeat the question? How long should they be expelled for?
Anybody
who wishes to be part of the process has to show that they have a commitment to peaceful means.
So how long should they be expelled for?
Well, how do they establish that they have a commitment to peaceful means when they've just committed murders? It's not just a matter of putting people in a sin bin for a week or two. And this applies not just to Sinn Féin, but it applies to other people too. We want to know, is there a genuine commitment? And then that commitment, in the words that the Secretary of State has used, has to be evidenced in terms of words and deeds. First of all...
How long would be long enough to convince you?
Look, the first thing you've got to have is a commitment. Now, we haven't heard one word to indicate that there is a commitment. Let us get a commitment to peaceful means first, and then let us see if it's going to be honoured.
Can I just ask you the question one more time, please? You must have some... Are you looking for an indefinite expulsion from the peace talks, or are you looking for a limited suspension?
If you had a commitment to peaceful means, then you might perhaps accept that commitment as being proved by a course of action over a fairly short period of time. That's what's been done in the past.
How short?
But the first question is there a commitment to peaceful means? Now, look, we know, everybody knows, you know, Mitchell McLaughlin knows, that the IRA broke their ceasefire and that they are not committed to peaceful means. Now, first question
He says he doesn't speak for the IRA, but let's leave that question aside.
There's only there. He is only there on the basis of an IRA ceasefire. If that ceasefire has ended, then we have to say, when is it going to be restored? When can we be sure that it is genuine?
But you have no idea in your mind as to whether this is a matter of days, weeks, months or years. No idea. Are you really telling us that?
What's the relevance of this question?
Because
you must answer that yourself.
You're the one who's been pressing for provisional Sinn Féin to be removed from the talks, and yet you won't give us any idea of how long for.
Sorry. The steps to remove Sinn Féin have been taken by the Secretary of State.
I didn't say you've taken them. I said you've been pressing for them.
They have been taken for the very simple reason that the IRA have broken their ceasefire. Now, it is a simple matter of the basis on which these talks should proceed. It's a question of the integrity of this process, which is to be founded on a commitment to peaceful means. I think there can be no argument about that. And we have actually been saying very little about this. I've been listening to the extent and the rapidity and the frequency with which a Sinn Féin spokesman referred to the Ulster Unionist Party and to myself. But we have been very restrained in what we have said. We have left it to the government. We have left it to the chairman. Today, in the talks process, we said not a word.
Mr. Trimble,
and tomorrow we will say very few words also.
Well, I'd be grateful if you too would stay with us, because, of course, we must hear what's happening north of the border. Figures released by the government tonight show what peace really means in Northern Ireland. Discounting the 2 killings attributed to the IRA last week, in the 6 months to January the 25th, Loyalists murdered 13 people, Republicans 2. That's peace, apparently. Sinn Féin have already warned that if they're suspended, it might encourage those who believe in violence. Michael Williams reports now from Belfast.
I've been in and around Belfast today trying to gauge nationalist opinion, their hopes and fears. Among those fears is that the threatened expulsion of Sinn Féin from the peace process will bring with it pressures on the IRA ceasefire. Optimism is a rare and rather fragile commodity here. Among nationalists, anger is a very much more common emotion. On the Falls Road today, that anger was repeated again and again. We brought together 4 people who work with community groups here in West Belfast.
Before we came in here today, I was saying that I was talking to a woman, and she was very, very quiet and reserved lady. And I just met her on the street out the front today, and she said to me that she was angry, and she was actually visibly shaken. And she said, I voted for Sinn Féin, I did not vote for the IRA, and I demand the right that Sinn Féin, as my representatives, are in those talks. And that anger is very, very visible on the street. People are absolutely livid that the British government is taking such a tough line here and demanding the expulsion of Sinn Féin.
What I would like to say is, and you're going on the word of Ronnie Flanagan. Ronnie Flanagan came up right and quick to say that ARA men were involved, but he didn't do that when 9 Catholics were murdered in these streets a couple of months ago.
People around here, people within our community, demand peace. We want peace. but we don't see how that can be achieved when one of the main components of the peace process are being disenfranchised and being put out.
Well, I believe the first fear that I would have, and the first fear that people in our communities would have, that there's no representation for us. Sinn Féin got a very large mandate when they went to the election. They got a very large mandate for them to go and represent us. So if you're saying we're talking about peace talks and solutions, and you're cutting off that sizeable electoral group, then you can't talk about settlements or peace talks.
Sinn Féin voices now echo through the corridors of Belfast City Hall, once a bastion of unionist power. And Sinn Féin's line throughout the day has been to point not to its links with the IRA, but to its electoral mandate, to its representation of the voters who brought it here, the more hard line of whom, it's feared, might direct their anger towards the security forces or across the sectarian divide.
One would hope that that would not be the situation, and indeed we would be encouraging people to express their anger and their anxiety in a constructive fashion by lobbying the opinion makers, by lobbying the governments, and by getting this peace process back on the rails where it should be.
This latest crisis in a process fraught with crises can be traced back to this street. 6 days ago, Robert Dugan, a man with links to a loyalist paramilitary group, was shot dead here. The police said the IRA were involved. But why that might have been is a cause for great speculation. Perhaps it was a bungled attempt at a no-claim, no-blame sectarian killing. There is, though, speculation that some Republicans wanted to find a way out of the talks. The latest gruesome addition to Belfast's political street art. It appeared over the weekend and points to Republican dissatisfaction over the progress and direction of the talks. An internal solution to the problem here reminds them too much of Home Rule, of the unionist government at Stormont. But for Sinn Féin to pull out of the talks would bring international condemnation. To be forced out is another matter.
Good evening. Tonight, Newsline 6:30 comes live from Dublin Castle, where efforts are underway to expel Sinn Féin from the talks process.
Every quote and soundbite has been analysed today, every twist and turn watched closely by the deputy editor of the Irish News, a paper which speaks to and for the nationalist community.
If Sinn Féin were expelled from the talks, that under the terms of the most recent statement from the IRA, when they said they were maintaining their cessation in the hope that meaningful negotiations would continue, there's been some suggestion that if there are no meaningful negotiations, or at least what the Republicans would see as meaningful negotiations, then that restriction no longer applies.
And if Sinn Féin, as seems likely, is cut out of the talks, there must be doubts as to whether any meaningful outcome is possible before the self-imposed deadline in May.
The deadline, which everyone keeps talking about, is looming. It's very difficult to see how matters can be resolved in the meantime. If Sinn Féin are expelled from the talks, as everyone expects, and if they return in the near future, then it's still possible that some progress could be made. And obviously, it's also important that the UDP should return. But the process is losing members rather than gaining members, and that has to be an alarming development.
In Belfast tonight, Republicans continue to hope that Sinn Féin will, in 24 hours, still have a seat at the table. They are, though, impatient, and the task for Republican political leaders is to persuade the military leaders that patience during an expulsion can pay off. Without it, Sinn Féin may never return to the talks.
Well, Mr McLaughlin and David Trimble are still with us in Dublin. Mr Trimble, first of all, it's clear there is some rising anger there in nationalist areas of Belfast. Do you accept that in pushing Sinn Féin out, if they are pushed out, there is a risk that people might be pushed back into violence?
Well, violence has already occurred. Sinn Féin IRA have resorted to violence. They had the opportunity through their participation in these talks to make a contribution to the process. But what did they prefer to do? They preferred to get involved in a sectarian killing and a dirty little drug turf war. So that's what happened.
I mean, the reality. Are you not worried about the possible consequences?
Of course we're worried about the consequences, and I would be even more worried about the consequences of abandoning the Mitchell principles and saying you can kill as many people as you like and you'll still be at the table. Now, that's not acceptable.
But you heard
it's not acceptable to the British government, it's not acceptable to the Irish government, it's not acceptable to ourselves, it's not acceptable to the SDLP, it's not acceptable to the Alliance Party. I could go on.
You heard the figures from the Northern Ireland office given tonight. In the 6 months up to January the 25th, Republicans, this is excluding the latest 2 killings, Republicans killed 2 people, Loyalists killed 13. That's Northern Ireland office figures.
And that is why the UDP were excluded from the talks. There is no loyalist group currently in the talks responsible for any violence. I think you should point that out. It is true there have been a number of murders committed by loyalists, committed by groups who are not involved in the process, and by a group that was, and which was removed from it. I mean, we had at Lancaster House 3 weeks ago, the UDP were removed from the talks because they were involved in 3 murders. Now, there's a question here of applying rules fairly and equally.
Okay, well,
and what was applied to then has to be applied now.
Fine. Well, let me then go back to what I was asking you earlier. You say what was applied to them should be applied to Sinn Féin. They were effectively, apparently, expelled for about a month.
Oh, no, wait a minute. Exactly what I said to you earlier has to apply to them too. And what I want to hear, and I have not yet heard, either from the UDA or the UFF, or the groups responsible for the murders, is that they have restored a genuine ceasefire and committed themselves to peaceful means. I haven't heard that, and I think it would not be wise for the governments to turn around and say, oh, it doesn't matter about a commitment for peaceful means, we'll bring them back in after a token exclusion. That, to me, would be undermining the process, because there has to be, the whole process is founded on the assumption that people are prepared to work the political process and to do so by peaceful means. People were given the opportunity to come in and make a contribution, but unfortunately some groups prefer to remain attached to violence, and it runs contrary to the democratic process.
Mr. Trimble, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin, how difficult is it going to be for you to persuade the sort of voices that we heard there in Belfast that these talks are worth persevering with?
I think extremely difficult.
Only just arriving for Panorama on BBC One in a moment.
I never thought there was a woman in the world who could affect me so much.
I hope I may never kill him!
Paul McGann stars in a major new adaptation of Charles Dickens' Our Mutual Friend.
He's nothing to you anymore.
Oh, yes, he is.
Coming soon to BBC Two.
He is much to me.
This is the road.
2 families. I'm not going! I've got no shoes!
They've turned into basically the children from hell, I feel.
Turn it off!
The occasional smack delivered at the right moment can work wonders.
2 very different styles of parenting.
The whole thing's a communication exercise, I think.
You're getting good at controlling your inappropriate impulses. Hector! You look at your child and you establish eye contact.
What is the secret of bringing up well-behaved children? Modern Times, Wednesday at 9 on BBC 2.
Stop it! You should have brought a stick.
This is BBC Two, the spicy station.